Thomas wakes up in a metal box with no memory, and that first panic, the claustrophobia, the pounding of his own heartbeat, that's where the movie drags you in. He emerges into the Glade, a big grassy courtyard surrounded by towering, shifting stone walls, inhabited by a rough, self-governing group of teenage boys who've been living in this bizarre prison for years. There's Albie, their nervous but steady leader, Newt, the calm, diplomatic second-in-command, Minho, the hot-headed keeper of the runners who actually maps the maze every day, Frypan, the cook with surprising leadership chops, Gally, the suspicious hardliner who is oddly threatening for a farm boy, and sweet, naive Chuck, who almost immediately latches onto Thomas like a little brother. Thomas is bewildered, curious, and stubbornly optimistic. He's the kind of protagonist who asks questions nobody else will. We learn the rules fast. The Glade is a community that has made a life amid the mystery. Every month, a new boy arrives in the box with no memory of his past. Supplies come in, and the maze, a deadly, shifting labyrinth that opens during the day and locks at night, is mapped by the runners. At night, grievers, terrifying biomechanical monsters hunt in the maze, and anyone left inside when the doors close is essentially doomed. The boys have their roles, and everyone accepts the routines because it's the only way to survive. All of that structure starts to crack the second day Thomas is there, when the box drops one more person into the Glade. A girl, barely conscious, with a note that reads, "She's the last," and a message that everything is going to change. That's Teresa. Her arrival is literal chaos, the first female ever, and she seems to know Thomas in a way no one else does. There's a connection between them that's as unsettling as it is intriguing. They have flashes of each other's memories, they finish each other's sentences, and Teresa drops the cryptic line that people in the Glade will be tested. Thomas is immediately dangerous to the status quo because curiosity is his superpower. He wants to be a runner. He wants to enter the maze and figure out why it exists. Minho is skeptical but also impressed by Thomas's guts. The runners attempt to map corridors and doors every day during daylight, returning before nightfall. It's monotonous, terrifying work, and there's a palpable fear that the maze is designed to break them, not free them. The tension ramps up when Albie and another boy, Henry, enter the maze and don't return before the doors start to close. The Gladers panic. Albie is found half mad, stung by something, and he begins to go out, a term for when the mind breaks down after a griever attack. In the middle of that crisis, something snaps in Thomas. He chases Minho into the maze at night to help, and this is the film's first big set piece: claustrophobic corridors, blinking lights, and the claws of those horrific grievers. It's a baptism by terror. Thomas sees in brief but terrifying flashes memories of experiments, labs, and words like WCKD and flare that he can't yet place. He's stung during the rescue attempt, and instead of succumbing, he experiences a violent, disorienting rush of memory, things the boys in the Glade don't remember: labs, other people, injections. It becomes obvious that Thomas and Teresa are different. Their memories and their connection hint that they aren't random victims, but part of something orchestrated. Back in the Glade, Thomas recovers from the sting in a way that makes Newt and Minho both suspicious and impressed. Albie, having been stung earlier, becomes catatonic and a threat, but he's also central to the group's identity. Thomas's willingness to break rules and go into the maze makes some people angry. Gally, in particular, sees Thomas as dangerous, someone who could doom them all, but it also rallies a new hope. The Gladers have mapped a lot of the maze, but it's incomplete. The center, the way out, the purpose, these have remained maddeningly elusive. Teresa is frustrating and compelling. She seems to suffer from the same memory bleed as Thomas and carries a coded message that becomes central later. Her presence accelerates everything. She and Thomas together trigger glitches in the maze and in the sense of security of the boys. There's a scene where Teresa touches Thomas and a burst of connection temporarily frees Albie from his stupor, the implication being that their link is more than shared amnesia. They are somehow key to whatever experiment is being run. The lines between friend and foe blur. Gally becomes openly hostile and stokes people's fear, while Minho and Newt try to be pragmatic. Thomas's hero arc is classic. He starts as the new kid, becomes the person willing to take insane risks, learns to work with the runners, and uses his stubbornness to push the group into action beyond mere survival. He leads a daring plan to return to the maze center to find answers and rescue Albie, who is dragged back there. They're racing a clock. The maze's doors will open and close, and the grievers are on a hunt. It's a brutal, tense assault on audience nerves. Thomas and Minho sprint through the maze at full pace, doors slamming, grievers squealing, and in the end they witness something unnerving in the center. Not some grand mechanical heart, but an area with a glowing interface and a recording that plays a transmission from a woman in a lab. That recording is a crucial reveal. It tells the Gladers what they've suspected and feared. This whole thing is an experiment, a trial run. A company called WCKD, they always say the name like it's a bad smell, led by scientists convinced they can cure a devastating pandemic called the flare, has been running tests on immunes, kids who may hold the key to a cure. The Gladers were chosen for this maze test to study behavior, cooperation, problem-solving under stress. The film doesn't spoon-feed you catharsis, it gives an alarmingly clinical explanation for the childhood trauma, and the boys' confusion turns into rage. They were kidnapped, drugged, and placed in a horrifying simulation to be poked and prodded. The escape sequence is an emotional and physical sprint. Thomas takes charge. He figures out the pattern, fights through grievers with brute force and ingenuity, and leads a core group, Newt, Minho, Teresa, Frypan, and Chuck, towards what seems to be freedom. But freedom never looks quite like they expect. When they finally exit the maze, it's not a sunny utopia. It's a burned-out facility full of dead bodies and broken machinery that makes it clear the world beyond the maze is a mess. They're rescued by people who initially appear to be saviors, and a woman explains the scientific rationale again, this time with a propagandist tinge. WCKD believes their tests are for the greater good. The survivors are told that they have been deliberately separated and observed, and Thomas, already reeling from the moral double-cross, lashes out. He and Chuck are particularly raw. Chuck, the earnest kid who bonded with Thomas instantly, becomes the heart of the group, and the film hurts you by making his fate meaningful. Chuck dies, sacrificing himself in a way that cements Thomas's resolve to fight and to find the truth. It's one of those moments where the movie refuses an easy happy ending, and your chest tightens because the kid was so pure in the middle of all this cruelty. The film closes by planting seeds for the bigger conflict. The WCKD scientists talk about immunes, trials, and larger purposes. You get the sense that the Glade was only one room in a much bigger game. Thomas, now fully awake to the truth, refuses to be a lab rat. He vows to find answers. Newt and Minho become his comrades in arms. Teresa remains an ambiguous ally, sometimes helpful, sometimes secretive, and Gally turns into a full-on antagonist who blames Thomas for their suffering. The last shots are equal parts dread and promise. The immediate danger of the maze is over, but the world they've been thrown back into is far worse than anything they could have imagined. This is a survival story that morphs into a rebellion narrative at the end. The boys aren't just running out of a maze, they're running towards an uprising against a system that would sacrifice them for a cure. What makes The Maze Runner work is less the novelty of the setup and more the human core. Thomas is relatable because he's stubborn, empathetic, and annoyingly persistent in asking uncomfortable questions. Newt's calm, Minho's bravado, Chuck's hopeful innocence, and even Gally's fear-fueled cruelty all create a believable micro-society. The maze itself is a fantastic character, claustrophobic, ancient, and mechanical at once, designed to make you feel small. The movie balances action sequences that are rough and cinematic with quieter moments that let you mourn what these kids have lost: normal teenage life, agency, and the right to choose. And yes, it's a little cliché in places, rigid leader types, the chosen one vibe, but it earns its stakes with solid performances and a steady, propulsive pace. There's also a moral question stitched through the film. Is it ever justified to sacrifice some for the many? Wicht's logical logic is chilling because it's plausible. We've seen history rationalize horrors in the name of greater goods. The Gladers don't have the vocabulary for that debate at first. They're too busy surviving. But their growing awareness becomes the emotional core. Thomas emerges as a leader not because of a prophecy, but because he refuses to accept that their lives were disposable data points. Finally, the ending is purposely unsatisfying in a cinematic way. It's meant to set up more. It promises that the next chapters will be about revenge, truth-seeking, and a larger battle in a world thinned by disease and corporate scientists playing God. If you're watching for thrills, you'll get them. If you're watching for heart, the relationship between Thomas and Chuck and Thomas and Teresa will stick with you. The Maze Runner is essentially an origin story, messy, brutal, and emotionally earnest, that turns a young man's confusion into the first steps of a rebellion. It's not subtle, but it's effective, and by the time the credits are rolling, you want to follow these characters into whatever comes next, even if the odds are terrible and the monsters are real.